Hi, everyone. Welcome to Taking Advice Off Autopilot, 3 skills for being more coach-like. I'm Whitney Sullivan. I'm a motivational speaker and leadership coach based in Bozeman, Montana. I'm on a mission to give leaders the skills and support they need to build a thriving leadership practice and to advance workplace education that emphasizes purpose, connection, and emotional intelligence. For today's lesson, we'll dive into the 3 skills you need in order to be more coach-like in your leadership practice. Because being a leader means you take responsibility for developing people and potential. And one of the best ways to do that is to integrate a coach approach into your leadership practice. These skills we'll talk about today and being more coach-like will enhance your ability to develop people and potential. So let's dive in. In its simplest form, being more coach-like in your leadership practice is all about giving advice less and asking powerful questions more. Shifting the internal narrative as a leader from being a great advice giver to a great question asker. And Michael Bungay Stanier is the author of The Advice Trap and The Coaching Habit, which are 2 great books to read if you're a leader trying to lead more coach-like. And he says that building a coaching habit is about staying curious a little longer and rushing to advice giving a little more slowly. He also says that as a leader, building a coaching habit doesn't mean that you will never give advice. It just means that we're taking advice off autopilot in order to choose the best leadership action for the moment. And, this seems simple enough in theory. And for anyone that's tried already to implement this approach or to implement more curiosity skills, you find that when you go to take the theory out into action, it's really hard. And so, why is it so hard to kick an advice habit? And Stanier would say that giving advice is an overtrained muscle. And that overtrained muscle is easily activated when others seek our input and seek our help. But to truly unlock and uplift the potential of the people that we lead, we must learn to develop a more undertrained muscle, which is curiosity. And there are 3 skills that help us build and train this curiosity muscle. And that helps us take advice off autopilot and really bring our coach approach to life. And those 3 skills are mindfulness, empathy, and humility. And the first being mindfulness. And my favorite definition of mindfulness is from an online platform called Happify. And they define mindfulness as the ability to know what's happening in your head at any given moment without getting carried away by it. And in our context today, I'm going to add on to that definition just a little bit. In a coach approach, mindfulness is knowing what's happening inside your head without getting carried away by it and creating space between stimulus and response in order to choose the best course of action for the moment. And in the context of a coach approach, mindfulness is paying attention without reactivity. So instead of immediately reacting to each request for help with advice, you develop space between that stimulus and your response. And in that space you create, you get to choose the best course of action for the person and the problem in front of you. And when we are reactive, we have an immediate response to a stimulus, as you can see in that first equation up there. But in the second equation, the more mindful we are, the less reactive we will be, and the more space we create to make a really wise choice about what the moment requires. And to give a simple example of what this looks like for a leader with a coach approach, let's say that someone stops by my office seeking my help with a problem that they're trying to solve. And I'm mindful of my urge to want to give the best, most perfect answer, and I choose instead to stay curious and ask a great question. In that moment, I'm paying attention in a way where I see this as a great opportunity to develop the person in front of me with a coach approach. But on the flip side, there will be moments that advice is appropriate. And that's why mindfulness is choosing the response that best serves the moment in the person in front of you. And I know that all of this sounds really great in theory, but often I have clients say, like, yeah, but Whitney, like, how do we do this? Like, how do we make this happen? How do we take this knowledge and put it into action? And to take this mindfulness practice and put it into action, I encourage you to reflect on cues and triggers this past week where you rushed to advice rather than pausing to be more curious. And step number one is being more mindful. Of being more mindful is being aware of those moments where we just have that urge to answer. And if you're not quite sure, a few common cues that are great signals and great flags in our brain that we should pause are up here on the screen. There's 4 of them. What do you think about? What would you do if? I don't know what to do about blank, or how do you know? So if one of the people on your team says one of these 4 things to you, just put a little flag around that on your mind to pause and create that space between the stimulus and the response, and see if you can choose the best response to that moment. Another thing that I see that gets in the way of practicing mindfulness in action is that lots of times leaders will try to practice this when the stakes are really high rather than when the stakes are really low. And so when you're looking to implement a coach approach, when you're looking to pause more, be more mindful, be really intentional about practicing those behaviors when the stakes are low with someone that you have a really good and safe relationship with. And if you really want to be intentional about being more mindful and building a coach approach, choose a direct report that you just have a really good relationship with, and that you can be explicitly transparent and say, I'm trying to be more mindful. I'm trying to be more curious. I want to ask more questions. And so I'm going to practice that with you. And that's often the best way to start establishing a habit. And then once you start to establish it, you can start to refine and improve it. And then also sometimes leaders will ask me like, okay, I got the pause down. Like I'm being more mindful, I'm being less reactive, I'm getting curious more, but now then what? Then what do I do? What's next? What questions do I even ask? And so I created a download. That way you can I created a download of powerful questions and essential listening skills. So that way you can go through and pick out some questions that fit the cues that you commonly experience throughout the week. And you can memorize a couple questions that you can have ready. And so this is a free download. You can get your phone out and get the QR code. I also dropped a link into the chat. That way you can download it from there as well. And the link is also on the screen. But this is there to help you kind of memorize a few really powerful questions. That way you have them accessed when you create that space to pause. The next skill that helps train the curiosity muscle is empathy. And empathy is a driving desire to understand the thoughts, feelings, and perspectives of another person with non-judgment. Empathy is others focused, and that supports curiosity. Empathy says, I want to see, hear, and respect your thoughts, feelings, and perspectives as real and valid. And in the context of coaching, empathy says, I want to understand you, and I want to ask questions to help you understand yourself better. Christy Hedges is an executive coach, speaker, and author of The Inspiration Code. And she conducted a Harris poll on the communication behaviors of the most inspirational people. And she found in that study that 38% of respondents said that making the effort to understand where I was coming from was an inspirational communication behavior. And when we really pause on that stat and put it in our context, that 38% of conducting an inspiring coaching conversation is simply making the effort to understand the person and the perspective of that person in front of you. And that 38% of being more inspiring as a leader is simply being more empathetic. And then same as mindfulness, we come back to that same question of like, okay, this theory is great in practice, or this theory is great in knowledge, but how do we do it? How do we put it into practice? And the number one thing to being more empathetic is really to make sure that you're doing really well at managing stress and preventing overwhelm. What I often see in leadership clients that I work with or in the groups that I train is that they all have the skills and the knowledge to be empathetic. What gets in the way is stress and overwhelm. And it's really hard to practice compassion when we don't have any brain space or any energy to give each other. And so to begin getting really good at this, I want you to write down 3 things that put you at your best every day. What are the daily practices of self-care that put you at your best brain state, that energize your body and fill your cup in order to give to others? Another way you could look at that is the opposite. What are 3 things you need to stop doing in order to have your best brain state, to energize your body, and to fill your cup in order to give to others? And this is so important because when we approach others from an empathetic stance, we are more able to get curious rather than put on an attitude of superiority and go into advice giving mode. And that takes us to our last skill of humility. And let's first look at humility's opposite, which is hubris, or an attitude of superiority. And when we have an attitude of superiority, we're not being curious. An attitude of superiority is breeding ground for judgment, assumptions, and bias, which is the opposite of empathy. This attitude sends the subtle cue that we are better than the person in front of us, which shuts down connection. And you need both connection and curiosity to really bring your coach approach to life. An attitude of superiority blocks important traits of curiosity like inquiry, critical thinking, and perspective taking. As Brené Brown would say, an attitude of hubris says we need to be right rather than to get it right. And we need to be a knower rather than be a learner. On the other hand, Brené Brown says humility is the opposite of that. It's a mindset that says, I'm here to get it right, not to be right. I'm here to be a learner, not a knower. And that is such an important mindset to have as a leader and to have as someone that wants to unlock and uplift the potential of others. So if hubris is an attitude of superiority, humility is an attitude of groundedness. It means that you know your strengths and you know your weaknesses. You know that you have expertise to offer, and you know that others have expertise to offer as well. Humility means that you're open to new learning while also having an accurate assessment of the knowledge that you have now. And this humility supports curiosity because it means that you can let go of needing to be the expert. Humility says, I don't need to have all the answers. I bring everyone around me value by asking great questions. And so I have 3 questions for you to reflect on that you can take into your leadership practice and take action on. First question is, who is a source of expertise on your team you have yet to fully maximize? Who's someone on your team that you need to dig into their knowledge and really ask them a lot of great questions so they can bring all their expertise and value to the table? Number 2, even if you are the expert, who on your team this week would benefit from a great question rather than a great answer from you? And then the last thing, what are 3 ways you're multiplying the intelligence of your team and not just relying on your own? And those 3 questions will help you activate that groundedness and that mindset of humility. And that's what helps bring that coach approach to life. Before we close out, I want to let you all of a new leadership program that I'm currently launching. It's called 5 to Thrive. And the goal of the program is to help rising leaders make a strong transition from star performer to thriving people leader. And in the first 6 to 18 months of their role, I really want to help these leaders lead with their head high, heart open, and feet on the ground. And if you want to learn more, you can send me a message, you can drop it in the comments, or you can go to my website, www.whitneysullivan.com/thrive. And I'll be putting out marketing and launching this program in the next couple weeks, but I'm really excited about it. So here's the bottom line for today. Taking advice off autopilot means that we must shift our mindset from great advice givers to great question askers. And going back to Michael Bunge's stand, building a coaching habit is about staying curious a little longer and rushing to advice giving a little more slowly. And the 3 skills that help us develop that undertrained curiosity muscle are mindfulness, empathy, and humility. And before you close out for today, just take a moment to reflect on the content and to reflect on the things that we talked about. What was most useful or valuable for you in this video? And if you want, please feel free to drop that into the comments and share with everyone. And thank you for joining me today. I'm always rooting for you all, and I look forward to seeing you all soon.